No, thank you so much, and it's so good to be here in Lahti, which is for Norwegians strongly associated with skiing. But it's even better to be here to debate something arguably much more important, namely acceptance for the energy transition. And I think it's worth. I'll just briefly run through who we are, so you know. We're a Renewables Association. Not a low-carbon association. We organize only the renewable sector in Norway. Happy to also have other Nordic members like Fortum, who are developing wind farms in Norway. And our aim is sustainability and growth based on renewable energy. So I'll just, in a moment, I'll skip to the topic at hand, which is, of course, is acceptance. But for someone like me, who's spending a lot of their time working on the minutiae of the decarbonization, on detailed regulation, taxes, grid tariffs, and so on, it's easy to forget the importance of public acceptance. But all the technical framework conditions will amount to little or nothing unless we can muster public support. So that is why I think this is so important. And I think, to be honest, the sector has failed to generate the necessary acceptance to a large extent. I'll be focusing on acceptance for the market, because that's what I've been asked to do, but working a lot with permitting and the issues which talk about local acceptance. I'll definitely also touch upon that, and the Norway prize, which was mentioned by the previous speaker. But I'd like to start out with 3 pictures. Fans of Harry Potter will recognize this image of an invisibility cloak. Harry Potter famously wore this, sometimes during slight misdemeanors, but more often during his outright heroic actions fighting the forces of evil. I might provoke a few colleagues here by saying this, but I believe our sector has, very much like young Mr. Potter, to a way too large extent been hiding under an invisibility cloak. And what do I mean by that? We've not been participating in the public debates at large. We've been focusing on the detailed technical regulations. We've not been showing our outright heroic contributions to society. This is a problem. Now, next slide. An old Norwegian saying, or maybe it's even a Nordic saying, is like, a soldier in peacetime is akin to a wooden stove in April. It means that the powers, like an oven, the usefulness is not readily apparent at the moment. And I think the sector is very much like that. Until the electricity runs out, we're invisible. And we haven't been able to show our contributions. So I do believe our sector is quite like that. The point about the soldier in peacetime, however, is also a sinister one, because a true war has emerged on Europe. And my third picture is a simple illustration of the consequences for energy prices. When Ukraine broke out, prices spiked. This shows the cost of import dependence. This shows the cost of lacking in what we and the EU like to call homegrown, i.e. renewable energy production. In 2019, the energy sector's invisibility cloak was removed, as it were. And all of a sudden, the sector, together with the energy market in particular, were to blame for extreme prices. We were suddenly center stage, while previously we were taken for granted, and in Norway in particular, we'd taken stable power prices for more or less for granted. Now, interesting from a public perspective, from a Norwegian perspective, is that you mentioned identity politics. The market and the EU as such were blamed for the prices. Somewhat ironically, as Norway was among the first countries to deregulate and provide a marketplace, Nord Pool, which later grew to encompass Nordic countries and, dare I say, inspire the rest of Europe. Now, much has been said about the recent resistance to market solutions, which has been particularly strong in Norway, and I will not pretend to have all the answers to why the resistance arose. My impression, however, based on anecdotal evidence, admittedly, is that the criticism of the market has been perhaps less pronounced in the other Nordic countries, as has been perhaps also the criticism of EU's role in this. One reason might be that Norwegian consumers have, to a larger extent, chosen spot market solutions, thus benefiting more from lower prices, but noting then more the strong price signal, the consequences of war as conveyed by the above-mentioned price signals, all the more clearly. Another reason might be the high level of resistance to the EU in Norway, which was also mentioned by the previous speaker, and its regulations, which is again truly ironic given that we pioneered the market. However, EU markets, ACERs, interconnectors, which has been mentioned by several speakers, has almost become an identity political soup in Norway, generating strong resistance to solutions that could and would benefit all. My hope is that gatherings like this at the industry and academic level, but ideally also at a more Nordic level, could help generate more acceptance. But I do also think that we as a sector need to convey the benefits of the market. And I'll limit myself to a couple of observations on that. The fact is, well, the market delivered extreme price signals, yes, which was largely due to not the market, but the lack of electricity and the import dependence of Russia. But the market also worked remarkably well. There weren't outages, there weren't any need to rationalize. It's simply a function of the lack of the high degree of import dependence. The market also has many other benefits that I think we as a sector need to explain more to the public. It's the best energy efficiency measure ever. By providing a clear price signal in the market, we have avoided overinvestment, minimized environmental footprint of production and grids, and reduced costs to society and consumers. This is often overlooked. The reason there's electricity available in your socket whenever you need it is that the market is the best solution anyone's ever come up with to balance supply and demand, at least in the short short time frame. But this is hard to explain to people. So I think we also need to acknowledge that the market is doing its job. It's not a good answer when we see electricity prices like this. And I think we also, and this is a tendency for many of the economists in my sector, we also need to acknowledge that sometimes the market needs a little help. Offshore wind, immature technologies is an example of that. The solar power that's now helping driving down costs everywhere came only about because of German subsidies, to use that term. So, moving over to the Norway price, which was mentioned by the previous speaker, which has become quite controversial also in a Nordic setting, I think. The market is quite good at efficiency. It's not good at distribution of welfare. So in Norway and in many markets, we've opted now in this extreme situation, which long-term can only be solved by more, I'd prefer to say, renewable production. We've opted to offer consumers a fixed price. And I think even in the market-based systems in the current situation, we need to be able to use mechanisms like this to redistribute, because the alternative of, which could also happen at the European level, of destroying the fundamental underlying price model would have much more negative consequences. I understand that we're running a bit short of time, but I'm also going to be touching on the interconnectors, which has been mentioned previously. I think as fellow Europeans, we seriously need to up our cooperation game. We need to make energy solidarity great again, to put it that way. Interconnectors are particularly controversial in Norway, but they're helping security of supply and they're helping cooperation. In a renewable weather-based energy system, interconnection is just not important. It's of absolutely paramount importance. For the Nordic energy system with ample flexible hydropower, production interconnectivity provides great benefits. This is something we have to address and communicate long term. No man is an island, as the saying goes. The same thing applies to countries. I realize that this is very challenging now. Mentioning interconnections in Norway, as we just learned, boosts supply, but I think we'll long term have to paint this picture. Now finally, we've heard a lot about the resistance to wind power in Norway, and I feel sort of silly saying this, but I think we've also been able to do something well. You mentioned that we increased compensation to local municipalities and other affected parties. Well, we've had that for years for hydropower. In Norway, it's viewed as part of the social contract that when you use resources locally and affect local municipalities, you need to contribute. So we need also, in the local acceptance game, to have very targeted compensation mechanisms that now are actually beginning to make Norwegian municipalities consider wind power again. In the interest of time, I'll stop there. Thank you.
You're doing great with time. Thank you. Do we have questions?
One. And we just, oh, actually two. So, does Renewable Norway see the implementation of the Norway Prize as a hurdle in further cooperation between Nordic countries' organizations?
I kind of expected that question because I know the measure has been criticized, that it has also detrimental effects on the market we share, and it's important that we take care of the market we share, and it's important. I realize that this could be perceived as the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund subsidizing Norwegian consumers to the detriment of our Nordic neighbors. I don't think that's accurate, though. I think this has only moderate consequences, and the debate in Norway is rather what you alluded to, that this does not provide long-term incentives for energy efficiency or putting solar power on my roof. And I agree, I'd prefer that we didn't have to use this measure, which is not unlike other measures being used to compensate consumers. But again, in the current market situation where there is lack of new supply, it is better to do hopefully intermediate measures like this rather than meddling with the fundamental market.
Thank you. Time for one more?
Time for one more.
What is the role of social capital and community action for the resilience of the energy system?
That's a broad question. I think I'm going to try to answer it in this way, and maybe this is also something we can touch upon in the discussion. We have had in Norway a strong focus on foreign capital coming and building wind farms. This is not fair criticism, really, but what we see now is that local utilities are engaging with municipalities, creating value, also showing that new production is associated with workplaces in the smelters. So for developers, I think it's very important to have that in mind when they approach municipalities.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you can take a seat if you...
Yes.
Yes. And I will... Yes, Annie, please. Oh, you can clap. Yeah, Annie was going to applaud. Thank you. You're right. Absolutely. Absolutely.